here to make a new type of news.
New insights, new styles, and new topics every day.
We are News Generation.
Making news just for you. It's June 14th here in Seoul. I'm Shin, and this is News Generation, where we make the news at Arirang's very own open studio. Every morning, we'll discuss the top issues and latest current affairs affecting people in their 20s and 30s. Joining me in the studio is Park Ki-hoon.
Thank you for having me.
All right, and now Song.
Hi, everyone.
Now, both are here to speak on behalf of people in their 20s and 30s. As usual, let's start with our news feed, which covers different hashtags and news items that have been trending on social media over the past 24 hours. Soccer superstar Lionel Messi arrived in Beijing on Saturday as his country, Argentina, will play a friendly match against Australia. Before he was greeted by hordes of fans, he was unexpectedly stuck at the airport for bringing the wrong passport. Messi, a dual citizen of both Argentina and Spain, brought his Spanish passport, but China and Spain don't have a deal for visa exemption. Media outlets reported how Messi asked Chinese officials if Taiwan isn't a part of China because in the past, he had no problem entering Taiwan with a Spanish passport. Moving on to our next story. Kakao Talk has long been considered the most used and representative chat application among South Koreans. But IT Industries recently found that a growing number of teens and those in their 20s have flocked to Instagram and the direct messaging function, mainly because you can DM anyone as long as you know their Instagram handle. Industry insiders analyze how the younger generation seem to be hesitant on revealing personal info like their phone numbers to friends they'd like to talk to only online. Now, speaking of social media, a mother reached out to what seemed to be the chairman of Samsung Electronics on Instagram. The account had over 380,000 followers and posts of the chairman and his company. This mother asked if she could receive help from Samsung Medical Center to treat her child suffering with a rare disease called mucorrhapid. Now, days later, the hospital coincidentally reached out to her, agreeing to help her out by developing a cure for this rare genetic disorder. Now, we're going to take a closer look at the third news item. Nobody knows exactly how a message to the fake account of Lee Jae-yong ended up getting delivered to a doctor at Samsung Medical Center. And the mother thinks that the chairman's SNS impersonator was behind this. What's for sure, though, is that Samsung's chairman Lee Jae-yong does not have any social media accounts, and the fake account is still up and going and still has more than 380,000 followers. Now, this is definitely a miracle now, but what did you think about this story?
I mean, it's so wonderful that this happened to this little girl and that she was able to get treatment, but impersonating someone is a crime and it should not be done. And while I deeply appreciate whoever moved so that this girl can get treatment, this does not make it okay to have a fake account. And it could be used for far worse things. People can get scammed, so that should not be excused.
And we'd like to emphasize that we don't know whether it was the impersonator who delivered this information to Samsung and Samsung Medical Center. As of now, what we know for sure is that Lee Jae-yong does not have social media accounts.
That's right.
So what are your thoughts on this? Even though they might have been used for good purposes, like this case, what do you think about fake accounts?
You know, I think it's not the right thing to do.
For sure.
And this is just one lucky incident, but it's not always the case like this. But one person that I know who has a social media account is Jung Yong-jin, the vice president of Shinsegae. So he does have one, but obviously Lee Jae-yong doesn't. But I think, you know, using fake accounts can lead to, you know, negative consequences like, you know, fraud, phishing, or even like kidnapping, to go a little more extreme.
Yeah.
But I think social media users need to be a bit more educated and grow a better sense of awareness when they go beyond the initial purpose of just social media. For me, it's just pure entertainment, but I don't take the next step by maybe like, yeah, it can be informative, but if you go to seek help or like going through other people's Instagrams, whether it's fake or real, and just going beyond that entertainment purpose can, you know, cause a lot of troubles.
That's a really good point right there, because it's really hard to detect whether it's a fake or real account. You never know who's behind the screen and monitor, thinking of ways to, you know, scam you or take your personal information. So as Kyun mentioned, always be careful. And that was our news feed for this Wednesday. Let's head into our discussion topic of the day. You may have seen this hashtag on social media over the past few weeks. It's hashtag #NotMyAriel. What's that about? Take a look at the screen to find out.
This is Halle Bailey. She's the modern-day Ariel. Well, that's according to Disney in 2023. Disney chose this actor and singer as the main character of the live-action remake of the 1989 animation The Little Mermaid. But their choice has stirred a lot of drama before and during the movie's release. In the original animation, Ariel was white. The 2023 live-action film's mermaid princess isn't. People haven't been shy to express their thoughts on Disney's casting. Some are saying it's a good choice, showing more representation and diversity in media. Others are saying it panders too much to PC culture, short for political correctness, which refers to carefully avoiding actions or forms of expression that could exclude or insult certain groups of people. Today, NewsGen aims to answer 3 questions. 1. What do millennials and Gen Z in Korea think about Disney's choice of actor for Ariel? 2. Our generation seems to be leading the PC culture. What is politically correct? Who is determining the standards and with what evidence base? 3. What does our generation think about the clash between being true to the original form of art and being politically correct in media or the arts?
You've heard of the term being woke, right? It refers to being alert to racial prejudice and discrimination, but it has also taken a wider meaning and is also often used ironically by its opponents. The recent casting controversy behind Disney's The Little Mermaid has spurred a central question. Should accepting Ariel, the main character as a black mermaid, be a woke thing to do? And anybody who's against that, are they simply being racist, or is it another form of movie makers being excessively cautious over political correctness? I would like to ask you two in the studio your thoughts about this question, starting with Ki-hoon.
To be honest, I haven't seen the movie yet, and I may not, I'm not sure, but I have nothing against the casting of Ariel being a black actress. But interesting thing to note is that it's doing pretty well in the domestic market in America, but in the international theater market, it's not doing so well, especially here in Asia, Korea and China mainly. And does that mean Asians are racist? I'm not sure. I think that's another political correctness statement. But I just think using media like movies to convey political correctness can have many side effects. For example, losing the essence of originality, which should be protected because that's the main reason why it gathers so many fans in the first place and gains so much public interest. So I think there needs to be like a fine line and definition to really which way we should actually, look at movies. So,
Including The Little Mermaid.
Yes.
What about you, Nell?
I actually personally love the original Little Mermaid. I grew up watching it. A lot of our generation has, and I dreamed of becoming a mermaid someday, like a professional mermaid. And
Asian mermaid.
Yeah, an Asian professional mermaid. Those exist.
You can still do it.
I see why it's important for little girls to have representation they can look up to, and but I was a little disappointed when I found out that she wasn't going to look like the original Ariel that I knew
In the animation.
Right, but when I saw these reactions of little girls who are black, watching the trailers for Little Mermaid saying, "Oh, she's just like me," that almost made me cry. I was like, "Yeah, let the little girls have what they want," But even for me personally, growing up not seeing a lot of Asian representation in Hollywood, it was a little sad sometimes. But in this case, I think it's that, and also the fact that a lot of original fans were expecting Ariel to look a certain way, and when it didn't match up, they were angry. But even when Aladdin live action first came out and they saw the posters of Will Smith's blue genie, a lot of people were really concerned. But then once you watch the movie, you kind of, get along with him and he kind of grows on you a little bit. So I don't think it's fair to just label everybody as racist for not liking Halle Bailey's portrayal of Ariel in this case.
Yeah, for sure. And I think a lot of our generation was really attentive to who would be casted as the Little Mermaid because, as you mentioned, a lot of us grew up watching the Little Mermaid animation, and we're very excited to see these, animation come to live action films. Also, I feel our generation is really woke to the concept of racial diversity and representation. And it's not just the Little Mermaid. We've actually seen more movies and drama series try to represent diversity. Just off the top of my head, the Marvel series produced movies starring female protagonists or Asian heroes. US reality shows have expanded their cast to include more of the Asian, Hispanic, or Black community. Now, would you guys like to add on to the list of these different movies and films trying to expand representation?
Okay, firstly, movies with plots where female protagonists are saved by princes, like for example, Snow White, Cinderella, and Sleeping Beauty, they're not produced anymore because they are accepting the criticism of women being a little too passive and weak. And this leads on to my second point. The movie Frozen was made to show solidarity between women. And showing them that they're more than capable of saving the world, and it's not just the male characters who actually save the world, the planet.
Sisterhood and girl power.
Girl power. Yes,
Oh.
sorry, I shouldn't have done that. Anyway, lastly, the reinterpretation of well-known villains like Maleficent and Cruella to make them less evil and I guess a bit more likable characters is another prime example of expressing political correctness through movies.
Right. And it's funny that Kyun should mention, Snow White earlier because they are making a new Snow White movie in 2024 and it's actually starring a Latina as a Snow White as princess. But some of the great casted movies from the past, like Black Panther, it had almost an entirely black cast with great actors like Chadwick Boseman. I mean, rest in peace. Crazy Rich Asian was an almost all Asian cast, and it was a Hollywood movie, which was pretty successful. Recently on Netflix, there was a series called Never Have I Ever, and it starred Maitreyi Ramakrishnan, and she's Tamil, and Darren Barnett, he's half Swedish or quarter Japanese, quarter Cherokee, German. So lots of racial representation just in that. And it's a fun show to watch.
And you know what? I'm all for racial representation and diversity. I work in media myself. It's always great to see more diversity there. But let's be honest, I think a lot of our generation aren't okay when movies sometimes pander too much to political correctness that it affects the storyline.
Right.
Or sometimes you have to think a bit more and be like, how are the dots connecting there? So I would like to ask you the next question is, do you think it's more important to be politically correct even if it leads to a weaker plot or a new storyline forced into a movie just for the sake of wanting to see more representation?
Honestly, there are ups and downs to your point, but for me, at least, when I watch a movie, it's just for pure entertainment, for fun. But that can kind of, tweak a little bit when directors use too much, PC into directing and with their plots as well. But that's why one film critic said, the politically correct movement led by global groups will no longer be just a trend, but rather common sense and a phenomenon in itself. However, forced political correctness can actually evoke resistance.
For sure.
It is also lacking in terms of commercial success. So it is an undeniable trend, but it seems that more consideration is needed along with completeness.
What about you now?
And I think this whole debate is springing up because there haven't been movies talking about people from different backgrounds up until now. And our generation values voices of different minorities, and we've had the privilege of social media and the internet to express all of that. And I think racial representation should start from a place of telling more stories and giving a voice to someone. And up until now, Hollywood, Disney, Broadway, they have been the center of entertainment for the entire world, and they've made a lot of content about European descent up until now. And we shouldn't have to prioritize PC or originality. We should just have a lot of original stories about, people of color and minorities and people from the LGBTQ background. And there's so many ready actors out there. I'm an actor. Ki-hoon's an actor. Just call us up.
They're
Just
promoting.
We are
DM
ready.
me through Instagram.
Yes, DM us.
But that's a really good point right there. I think because for me, I found it to be a little crossing the line when you try to tweak a story into it just for the sake of political
When it
correctness.
seems forced
Exactly.
to push an agenda onto something rather than telling a genuine story.
And as you said, if we have more original stories about these different people of color or from minority backgrounds, it's definitely, a lot of people, including myself, will definitely go to the theaters to watch this. And to find out what the exact benefits or drawbacks from prioritizing political correctness in different media work could be, we're going to hear from a professor of film and media studies. We'll include her right after this. Another question I had while preparing this topic was, who is to say what's politically correct or not? To explain in more depth about what being PC means, we've prepared a live interview with Dr. Kirsten Moana Thompson, professor and director of film and media at Seattle University. Welcome, Dr. Thompson.
Thanks for having me.
All right, I'd like to ask you the first question, PC. It's been discussed in the media for quite a while now, but I've always wondered, who decides what's considered politically correct or not? What are the standards practiced at the moment? And who are the main decision makers? Is it up to the directors of a film, writers, producers? Who is it?
Well, these terms, political correctness and woke, are obviously negative terms to describe recent changes in media that you've been talking about that are reflecting a shift to greater diversity and that show characters on screens who reflect the world in its racial and ethnic diversity. But there are no specific standards for racial diversity. Instead, art and industry often reflect cultural contexts in which they're produced and the biases and prejudices that are also part of that context. And commercial filmmaking like Hollywood, is often more conservative than independent film. Hollywood is, of course, a dominant industry in the United States with a global reach, and its casting practices, as in many countries, are very different from independent filmmaking. Like most creative decisions in filmmaking, casting a film is collaborative. It might include the writers who first conceived the story, but usually the writers have the least amount of power, certainly once they've sold their story. And then comes the casting director, who often makes a lot of the secondary choices. To the directors and the studio heads who like to pick stars, and this has been a long tradition of picking stars as a form of insurance on films. In Hollywood, usually studio heads and sometimes directors and stars have the most power in determining who gets cast in a film.
All right.
Wow, I cannot agree with you more. Dr. Thompson, why do you think more films are trying to be politically correct? Are more people choosing PC-sensitive movies over those that aren't? What are the upsides of being PC?
Well, I think race-blind casting has become a standard in theatre and has been moving more recently into the movies. If you look at Disney, classical Disney films, and you mentioned a number of them before, like Snow White, Cinderella, and Sleeping Beauty, they only showed certain forms of representation, white femininity, basically. But beginning with what was called the Disney Renaissance, which began with The Little Mermaid in '89 and was followed by Beauty and the Beast and The Lion King in the 90s. That's when Disney makes a comeback, and it shifts in its representation to showing a new kind of storytelling in which the heroes, usually female, have more agency, are less passive, as you mentioned. And in more recent films like Moana, Encanto, Brave, Princess and the Frog, Frozen, and so on, they've shifted to showing a greater racial and ethnic diversity that reflects global diversity. There's been a greater awareness that Disney films should reflect the world as it is. Second, Disney's fan base is a global fan base. African and African American, Latino, Asian American, LGBTQ, Pacific Islanders, they're all significant consumers of Disney media, and they want to see themselves and their daughters reflected on screen. So when you cast a film with Javier Bardem and Halle Bailey and Melissa McCarthy and Awkwafina, and also remake an iconic film, Disney is attempting to appeal again to global audiences and cultivate new generations of fans.
And I'd like to ask you the third question. You've just mentioned this era of Disney Renaissance, and it's a new era, and in a way this is the second one as they are trying to expand. And why do you think this is causing so much controversy and sparking so much debate?
Well, I think that one of the big things is that people often feel strongly nostalgic about the films for which they have personal feelings. And in fact, a number of you mentioned this before. The films that are part of our childhoods, we often feel proprietary about, and those are the iconic versions for ourselves. There's been a lot of controversy with Disney in general with its films in remaking what have been perceived to be classics. And people wonder, why remake what was already a wonderful film, a successful classic? But the reality is Hollywood has always done this. It has been remaking its own films over and over again since the silent era. And Disney is simply doing that by remaking its animated films a second time, this time as computer-generated animated films. We often think of them as live-action films because they have live-action performers in them, but they're actually largely animated again. They have computer-generated effects. And when it comes to it, let's not forget that the mermaid is a mythological creature. So she can be any race we imagine her to be.
Exactly, and I think we are going in the right direction, as you mentioned, with all the good points that you've mentioned today. Thank you so much, Dr. Thompson.
You're welcome. Thank you.
All right, and before we continue our talks, we're also going to hear what our global viewers had to say on today's topic. Take a look at the screen to find out. Tira Spell said, being black and growing up in America, I've seen very few examples of appropriate cultural representation along with other minority communities. Deficit Broadcasting said an easy proposed solution to this spectre is simple. Stop talking about it. Focus on the content of one's character, not the color of our skin. Wenga Nixtwa said, to be honest, I'm very disappointed to hear about the response to The Little Mermaid in China and South Korea, given how much we like to believe the world has changed, but clearly it hasn't at the rate we think it is. I've been watching Asian movies and dramas for years, even before K-dramas and movies became available on Netflix, and I am a black person from South Africa. So my last question here in the studio, very briefly, would be, as consumers and moviegoers, what type of content would you guys like to see more in theaters?
You know, it's good to see that there are more diverse content that we can all see. That's very easily accessible. And it's great to see that directors or writers, casting directors, put a bit more PC-driven ones. But at the end of the day, as an audience, it's our choice to what to watch and what not to watch. So I think whatever we watch, we're going to be careful like what comments we make online because it can go viral. So I think we should be a bit more responsible as viewers.
What about you now?
Yeah, I think I just want to talk about, not focusing on the agenda of PC itself, but rather telling the story. And I think after, the doctor told us, we really need to understand that all these stories are kind of repeating itself, but we just really need to cater it towards telling that person's full story rather than just kind of halfway changing the story,
Giving them specific roles just because based on their gender or even their racial or sexual orientation. As the doctor mentioned, I think it's really important that we, drive a little further from the concept of political correctness and accept everything because there's diverse original stories there. All right, and we'll be here every day from 9:30 to 10 a.m. Korea time, bringing you more topics young people are talking about. Special thanks to Park Ki-hoon.
Thanks always.
And Nelson. No problem. Thank you everyone for watching. We'll see you tomorrow. We are News Generation.